My name's James Morris, and I was born and reared in the town of Lord-and-Ray, and I've been farming all my life, and I'm now 78 years and almost retired. But I've seen an awful big change in the farming from ever I was young to the present day. But years ago when the farm, the Sabbath day was kept, there was only the very necessity work would have been done. That would have been feeding the animals maybe, and on a Saturday night, everything else would have been done, shoes cleaned and all this. But you don't even been sure cleaning your shoes or anything less on the Sabbath day. And you went to Sunday school in the afternoon, you went to church in the morning, and you went to church in the evening. And at that time, there used to be a ferry going across from Warren Point to Lameath, and we wouldn't even have been allowed to go over to Lameath on that ferry. And there was an ice cream van went up our road every Sunday, and I wouldn't have been allowed to stop the van to buy ice cream. Well, my granny used to rear turkeys. She would rear turkeys, and she sold them then at Christmas, but she would always keep 3 or 4 turkeys. That usually one of them at Christmas, and then there was usually one at Easter, and then if there was anything special on throughout the year, then she would have killed another turkey. It used to be on the New Year's Eve. He would aye, he would open the front door of the house and let the year that's passed out, and he would open the back door to let the new year in. At Easter, whenever my mother would have boiled eggs, she would have got some of the yellow blossom of the one bush and put it in the saucepan, and the eggs would have come out yellow. And then later on in the day, then there was some of our land, there was hills in it, we took the eggs out and rolled them down the hill. The 12th day was a very big occasion, and you made sure in those days that if you had hay to cut or mowed off or anything like that, that would surely have been baled a day or two before the 12th day, because the 12th day was very special. And on the 12th day, then everybody, the men and women, was all dressed very best, and out they went. And the 12th day, if you were about, if wherever you lived at, your Roman Catholic neighbour would have kept an eye on the place on the 12th day. The doing is, if you were getting married, your pals would have kept an eye on you, and they would have made sure that they got a hold of you in your house some night before the wedding. It could be a week before, it could be 2 or 3 days. And the maybe would have put you in a trailer behind a car, and they would have emptied stuff over your head, and they would have half stripped you, and they would have driven you round the town for about half an hour, and you would have been in some form. The hooker was the digger, the spinner. The hooker was the spinner for spinning the spuds out whenever you were later on, whenever you were digging them. Whenever you dug them with a hooker, she left a wee bit of a ridge, and the older generation would have made sure you clatted that. Whatever you were gathering, then you had to clat this. They called it the back. They told you to clat the back. That had been a few potatoes would have been covered just with the drill turned over, and you had it as you done that as you gathered. But then later on, in the early days, then when the field was all dug, then sometimes you would have gone through it with a grubber, and then you had to gather any potato that was still left, which wouldn't have been very many. But there's none of that in later years because the machinery was going over the ground that often. Then it wasn't worthwhile. And the modern harvesters now that you would get all the potatoes at the one go. The plaiting was you opened the drill of potatoes with a drill plough, and that split the drill, and the potatoes was lying every place. And you got down on your knees then, and you gathered the potatoes. But as you went, you had the potatoes covered in the soil, and you had to clat the ground, pull the soil back to get any potatoes that was covered with a plough. That was called clat. Well, having the produce was whenever you gathered them, they were put in clamps in the field, or pits as they called it, and they were covered with rushes, and the rushes was called split. But then later on, at the end of October into November, before any frost came, you would have ploughed 4 furrows round the pit or the clamp, and then you shovelled the soil up over the pit about 6 inches deep, and that was to keep the frost out during the winter months, and that was called happen. That was the very small potatoes. They were used to feed the cattle. A jib field was, say, a field with 3 acres, and maybe 2 acres of that would have been square, but then the other acre would have run into pints, and those pints were called jibs, short, short drills. Well, breading ditches is if the sheep or cattle breaks into another field, there's a gap left, and then breading is whenever you go then. In the earlier years, there was no machines for cutting the ditches, and the ditches would have been grew up high, but you took a hook or a saw and you cut some of those bushes or thorn branches down and put them in the hole or the gap, and that stopped the sheep or cattle from breaking out again. It was a temporary job, but it done for a month or 6 weeks. Brack was a seaweed, and years ago I can remember being out in Mill Bay shore, about half a mile out. The rack grew on stones, and every year those stones had to be lifted up so that they weren't covered. And later on, then in the springtime, then when the rack was needed, it was a fertilizer. And whenever it was needed, then the men went out and they cut the rack off the stones, and they put the rack on a rope. A rope was right round, and they built the rack on that rope. And whenever the tide came in, then they brought the rack on the rope. And then when they brought it to the shore, then they put it on carts or tractors and trailers, and they took it to the fields and they put it off in small lumps. And then a day or two later, then you went into the field with a grape and you spread the rack. It was very easy to spread because it was very slippery. But that's the way it was yet. But then in later years, whenever the rack beds wasn't in use, then the east one would have brought the rack into the shore, into the beach. After each one, there'd been a lot of rack in along the shore, and the farmers would go down with the horses and carts or tractors and behind and loading this behind and threw it up and covered the fields with it, put it up in lumps, and later on spread it. And later in early years, the rack was put in the drills for the potatoes. It was put into the ridges, and you spread it in the ridges and planted the potatoes on top of it, and it was used as fertilizer, and it was good too. They would have used it on the grazing ground too, or any ground that was cropping in. Capping is if you were shifting cattle or cows from one field to another and driving them down the road a bit then, and whenever you would open the gate to the field that they were going into, you would have to get somebody to stand on the road, in the middle of the road, to make sure they went into the field, and that was called capping them into the field, so they wouldn't get past you and get into the right field. That's what capping is, guiding them. Stooking corn is putting 4 sheaves together. You get one sheaf in each hand, that's 2 sheaves, and then you get another 2 sheaves and you put them the opposite way. And then you take a few strands of corn out of a sheaf and you tie it round the top, and that keeps them from falling. Well, redding up regards farming would be if you were finished getting the spuds and come to the end of the season, then you would go round the fields then, and you would make sure that all the bits of paper and everything that was left there from the gatherers, you would gather that all up. And then later on, if you were in the houses then, and sometimes later on then, if the houses got into a bit of stuff in the houses, then you gather that all up, and that was called redding up, to make sure that everything was tidy. That was the most important thing, making sure everything was tidy. That's what redding up is. Keeling ewes is putting a mark on them to make sure whenever they go to bounding with other men's sheep that they don't get mixed up. And keeling is, some men would put a red or a blue mark at the back of their head and put a red or blue mark then on their left side. And there was all different ways and different colours of marking the sheep. And some men would put a mark at the back of their head and another mark at the top of their rump. But whenever the men put the sheep to the mountain, maybe 7 or 8 different men's sheep on the mountain, and when they come to gather them up to clip them, or later on to take them off the mountain in the winter time, when you gathered them all up, every man knew his own sheep with his own mark. Sned turnip says, whenever you lift a turnip out of the ground, you bring up soil, and then you have a hook with you, a hand hook, and you take the soil off the bottom of the turnip with a hand hook. It's very easy done, and then you turn the turnip over in your hand and you cut the foliage off the turnip with the hand out. It's very easy done. Well, a grape is like a fork, only there's four 4 prongs on the grape, but they're very narrow and they're into the point, and they're easier used if they're not lighter than a fork. And then the potato, there was a potato grape that was used for shoveling the potatoes into the grater then, and that grape was about twice the width of an ordinary grape, and there were stronger toes on it, and there was a wee ball on each end of on each toe. That was so the grape wouldn't go into the potatoes, and that was used for scraping the potatoes into the potato sorter. A loaning is a lane. Loaning is another lane for a loaning is a name for a lane that leads up to a farm or leads up to the house. A byre was a place where they kept the cows, and they would have each cow tied in the byre, and there would have a place behind the cow, and that was called the root. That's where the manure would have went to, and then that would have been cleaned out every day and went to the dunghill, as they called it. And a shed was a large store where the farmers would have stored the hay and straw all winter. And a crew is a pigsty. That's a place where they would have kept the pigs. And I can remember a pigsty at our farm, and it was just a small house, slated and all, just not much bigger than a doll house. There'd been a wee gate into it, and they would have kept 5 or 6 pigs in it. That was a pigsty. And then the dunkel or the midden, that was where they put the cow manure or the cattle manure over the winter months. That's where it was stored, and then they carried it out to the fields in the springtime. And then a yard that was the farm yard. There'd been machinery kept in the yard, and that was sort of a yard for storing anything in. And then a loft, that was above the byre, and so I can remember us putting potatoes on the loft to sprout them to be planted in March. The loft would have been warm with the cattle and the cows below the loft. And a sheepfold, a butch, is a place where they would gather up the sheep years ago, and without bringing them to the yard, they would have gathered them up and put them in this butch. They had been going to drench them or do anything with them. And a shock, that's a drain that's along the field to gather the water for the water to run into. And then a billhook, that was like a hand hook, only there was a long shaft on it, and that was used for cutting briars or cutting thorns or cutting bushes to put in the ditches to stop the sheep or cattle. And then a langle, that was a rope that was used to put on the sheep to keep them from rambling. You put one on the front foot and the back foot, and that slowed the sheep up that they couldn't break out. And then there's a sleep. That was like a small, it was like a small trailer, but there was no wheels on it, and the horse would have pulled it, and it would have carried about 3 or 4 wheelbarrowfuls of soil, and the farmers years ago would have used those for bringing soil up. If there had been soil along the ditches in the field, they would have put the soil in these slips and took it up the field and emptied it over the body and spread the soil, and the horse would have pulled this. And a raper, that was a machine for mowing corn or mowing grass. And paling posts, that would be, in this present day, that's called fencing posts. Post you put in if you were fencing along a hedge or a ditch. Well, a Saturday flit was that it was supposed to be very unlucky if you were moving into a new house, that you didn't do it on a Saturday, because it'd been kind of unlucky to flit on a Saturday. Or if you had been in the hospital and the doctors told you could go home on a Saturday, a lot of people would have been very reluctant to go home on a Saturday. They would have rather remained in the hospital till Sunday or Monday, because they always said a short flit, a Saturday flit is a short flit. That meant that you could be back in the hospital shortly again, and nobody wanted that to happen. Well, a good one was whenever you put your 2 hands together and you could reach into the barrel to bring out meal for cattle as much as you could get in your 2 hands. Or if you were, like years ago, whenever the potatoes were in clumps in the fields, you could have opened them up. That was meant you could put your 2 hands together and just fill them into the basket, as the word that was called, open them. A one is if you had been able to gather up loose straw with your 2 arms, as much as you could get into your 2 arms. And then when you got them gathered up, then you sort of rolled them round in the ball, and you took a wee bit out of each end of and you tied them. That meant if you had been shifting it from place to place, it wouldn't have went all over the place. That was a one of them. Well, the scrape at dawn would have been used if you were getting up very early in the morning, or just at first sunlight. That would have been called the scrape at dawn.